All right. So hope the stream runs properly again. So it's a bit of an issue with connectivity. So number one, let's. I'm not. Was under the impression that this had been settled at some stage, but we still need a reference group for that course here, and that's probably very useful since that course is run for the first time anyway. So do I have any volunteers here that would like to be part of that reference group? It would be really helpful for just giving feedback. You know, you guys know many of the other previous courses better. So, for example, is there any overlapping? Anything we should do differently? Comments regarding marking, or you know, you name it, or what you think we should have emphasized more, or less, or what went well, perhaps even something positive, who knows. But we still need a reference group. So, do any volunteers? Yep, cool. Cool, there are 2 then, okay. I'll probably require you to write down your names afterwards and I'll publish it on the website. That's probably the easiest way, just after the session. Let's do that briefly. Number 3, anyone? I think 3 is the minimum requirement. So, yep. Yep, anyone? Reference group? Yeah, cool. Prepare. So, please, after the lecture, don't just escape, just write your names, and then we can publish that on Blackboard. So, and then we can start, you know, think about how to go about this and meet and so on. Yeah, cool. Thank you. So it was a good pointer here I mentioned earlier. Cool. So in the break, people told me that they have some sort of exposure to regular expressions here and there. Can you enlighten me, especially in second years right now, in how far you have seen that before and where? Not the voices I heard before already. So, but have you seen in databases yet regular expressions? It's kind of one of those binary questions, yes or no kind of thing. So you can just drift in either direction. No, yes, no, yes. Please. No, cool. Any other course? Mathematics, yes, there was some. Does anyone recall that one from mathematics, perhaps? Again, I wouldn't know, but just. Yes? No? Alan? No? Okay. Right, so there's some minimal exposure, but you haven't seen, you know, that use in code yet, right? So that's right. Okay. So right now we looked at validation in Go in particular, right? So I think it's particularly useful when you write your own APIs, you know, and you want to test input against it, and that maybe URL elements or snippets, like you, for example, strip the previous URL into chunks, right? You had individual chunks of URL in your first assignment, and you probably did some sort of checking against it using string comparison, for example, for github.com or something like that, so for known strings. But obviously you could have done that also using regular expressions, right? So, and sometimes if you don't know the input, but you need to test against given constraints, it's really worthwhile doing that actually, right? So testing your input. We didn't explicitly require it, but for the second assignment, it's obviously something you want to consider, at least to some extent. And it shouldn't be deadly hard, but I want you guys to actually have a hands-on experience and code it yourself. All right, so now we have seen it for Go on the server side. Why do I suggest that we look at it from JavaScript perspective as well? Any ideas? Yep, why do we do that? Possibly. Yeah, cool, yep. What else? You're spot on, in fact, yep.
Minimize the load on the server.
That's one of the key concerns as well, right? We looked at the performance earlier, and that was just, you know, one use that now imagine you have, you know, 100 users or something that are connected to your web service, especially since your only offering is a web service. You would have considerable load if any user request, you know, even the ill-fated mistake on the user side and just pressing submit is tested on the server side and bouncing back to the user, as opposed to doing a validation, a final validation before executing on the server side. So minimizing the request, the number of requests based on manual user input in particular. Yep.
Would you have to do it on both sides, both on the client and server, to prevent attacks and such? Or
to provide what? Sorry?
Attacks attacks, like if somebody
Yep.
trying to abuse the system.
So it's an open, I think it's a question you should extend to the entire class. The question was, do we really need to do it on both sides, server side and client side? What's the view intuitively? What do you guys think? It's a very good question, very good question. Anyone? Please.
Depends on what kind of service you're running and the security levels that you're required for that service. If it is a high security service, then it should be in both places. But if it's not, then if the client side is good, then you should assume that the client side is enough. But
Are you sure?
in theory, don't trust anyone. So
Yeah.
do it on the server response.
Okay. Other views? There's, yep.
You can make the server only accept requests from your code, your client side code, but you have to protect yourself from the angles always.
That's the concern, right? So, in how far is the server code and client code linked, right? To have any additional measure of, authentication or authorization in the widest sense, then you could delegate it in theory to either side. However, in the case of open formats, right, in principle, even though we may write, for example, we did it just here, we may just write our own client-side HTML or form basically, and point it against the given server, and basically remove and strip all the possible validation that you get. Then it would still expose the server to possibly invalid input that should have been checked on client side, right? Because if it's run on your machine, you can modify it. So it's if it's JavaScript code that runs in your own browser. So from that perspective, ultimately you will need to do it on both sides to really have a reliable system. So you're kind of duplicating your activity there, and there has been a bit discussion around it, but I think there's no really conclusive best way of doing it, because again, there's always this performance concern. Unless you can really offload the regular expression checking to another machine, you could possibly do it there. But from a scalability point of view, it's best to do the initial validation on the client side, so you avoid unintentional errors, let's say, by the user, and give quick and early feedback, because you can easily implement that obviously in JavaScript, so the server doesn't need to be involved at all in the initial stage. And ultimately do it on the server side before, for example, injecting anything into the database or the like, right? But you would only do it once the client side has kind of already established that the input is valid to some extent, and the server side one is just simply to prevent possible abuse of the API. Yeah, so that's the kind of angle I would take on that one. Any thoughts, comments? Further opinions? I mean, anyway, that would be the safest way of going about it, right? So, ideally, both, at least server side. That would be my take on this one. Hang on, I think this TV is about to switch off. What do I need to do? Probably if anyone can press the button there, would be nice. Thank you. Cool. So let's look at the JavaScript side of things. You haven't seen it in JavaScript, right? Just to ask a question here. No. Yes. No. Cool. I take that as a no. Good. Right. Let's just stay in the same project. It's a bit unorthodox, I guess, but we get away with this. We are let's write in HTML for now. Again, we need to have some sort of form. And we're only doing a checking in JavaScript itself. So let's add some form. Do we need to get a form? So let's be right. We want to have a let's use the first number again. See how far we get with that. Probably have a label here to make it more proper. input type. We accept text. Name. Text ID. Closing. Tag. Anything missing? Nope, that looks fairly complete. And again, we need to have some sort of input type equals button, and give it a value submit. Cool. Just need to find that on my machine somewhere here. Hang on, and then let's bring that up here. Cool. Oops, there was some type on my part somewhere. Ah yeah. Auto completion has defeated me. Cool. So we have a first number, and that's pretty much it. So cool. So I first show you the way of how to do it in the old-fashioned way, because there are multiple ways of doing it, and I think you should be exposed to multiple of them, which I think is yeah, I don't know, possibly quite useful. First of all, we need to have some JavaScript. I do it in one script right now for the sake of keeping an overview. And then we probably just use jQuery to access individual components. For this purpose, we probably should identify individual components. So let's call that one here submit form. What else do we need to identify? Yeah, button. So we give it identify as well. This is btn submit. Say cool. So if we now write our scripts, let's identify the form first. So it's a document. Get element by ID. That's the generally the most reliable one. You could iterate through the DOM. Did you hear DOM before? Document object model? No? Yes? Binary question, quick. Yeah?
Yeah.
You heard, right? Or to second years heard?
I have, but that was like in the, I believe it was like in the database course. So
Okay, so no. Right, cool.
Yeah.
Right. So you haven't heard that yet, possibly, right? So you have a kind of a hierarchical organization. Every document has a hierarchical tree-like structure with that allows you to access the different elements. For example, the head, content of that, like the title, the body, elements in this one, and basically navigate through all the different components and access them and modify them and so on. This is one way is simply to navigate through all those components. The second one is to address them by ID. So the DOM parser will itself identify the component more reliable. If you just iterate through it and, for example, do it by index, for example, you want to access the third input type or the second input type, which is possible, then your code will obviously break as soon as you start introducing or removing yet another input type, right? If the order changes, for example. So it's always preferable to use some sort of key or ID to actually perform the access. That's what I'm doing here anyway right now. So we're getting element by ID, and the element we're interested right now in is the submit form. Let's see if we get that. Submit form. Cool. And then we need to get the button. btn equals. Actually, we probably don't. Do we need to access the form? Yeah, we need to access the form. We get there in a second. So document get by ID. In this case, we want to access the button, which is btn submit. And we attach an event listener to that one. Do we have one here? Ah, yeah, there's something there. Event listener. We are waiting for a button click. So we so what's happening here? We first getting a reference to the entire form. You recall that the submit form has the ID submit form on top, right? So it binds the entire form, including all its components. So I'll just point to that line. That is this line here. Cool. And following that one, we are binding the button also accessed via its element ID. So we're binding this button here, right? This button component again. To just get the reference right here, this would be this button here. Cool. So now we are accessing the button and adding an event listener. We want to listen to a particular event on the button, and it happens to be a click. And when that happens, we execute some sort of function which we still need to come up with. Good. Cool. Anything else? No. Cool. So it's good. Right. So we execute an event listening. So now we need to think about how do you actually do the input validation there. So first of all, we probably need to come up with a function that we will call when that is happening. And what are we interested in doing? Good. Well, something like, you know, check content. And this should be something like a text ID. Note this is just a variable name right now. It's not bound to the form entry at this stage. And now we need to think about creating the regular expression. So text. Probably do that one, and I'll go back and cheat a bit and copy it from our page here, which we have generated earlier. Cool. We don't expect anything else afterward. Yes. So we need to use this leading and trailing slashes in JavaScript. They allow us to inject flags. So it really depends on the kind of syntax you're dealing with. I wanted to bring up this JavaScript syntax specification, but it happens so that my internet is not really functioning well. Mozilla has a fairly good overview, including some tutorial elements that gets you started on this. But what I want to show you now is more like the mechanics of how to bring those two things together, right? The JavaScript and the regular expression. So cool. So we do some sort of evaluation. So we take the input, which is the text ID in this particular case, and let's see, there should be a match. Yep, there's a match function which we can use and apply the regular expression against it, which is regex here, and res will then contain a boolean that reflects whether we're successful or not. Hang on, no, I think res is null if there's no match, and otherwise it will contain all the matches. So for our purpose, that makes things relatively easy. We just check whether res is not null. And then, yeah, we can indicate something. I think to do that, let's add another element into the form. So we can print the result directly into the form itself. A bit more insight here. So cool. If it matches, then document get element by ID again. What am I missing? Did I get element by ID? What am I missing? get element by ID, and now it's result. And just replace the content with, well, a bit hacky, but we'll probably get away with that. And say invalid number. And in the other case, we do the opposite. So else, meaning if the res is null, we say invalid. So let's see, invalid. Does that make sense? I think it does. So far, cool. Sweet. Right. So now we still need to call the event listener. So what happens if we click the button? We obviously want to invoke what is it called? Check content, and want to pass the text ID, which we retrieve from via the form now. So we could have an identifier there as well, but we can also, just to show a different way, navigate there via the form itself. So form is the variable bound to the submit form ID here, and then we can access its components by name, which is text ID in this particular case. So form, so text ID, and then we want to get the value, I guess. So cool. So form text. So that should access the value of that particular form. And this should be all to actually perform a validation. Let's see how it actually works. Certainly worthwhile bringing the developer tools in case something goes sideways, so we can already see what's going on. So let's have an invalid code, hopefully. Invalid first number, that works. Okay, let's try a valid one. 24 5 1936, and then a few other numbers here. Oops, it spits out invalid. Hang on, what did I do? Actually missing one number, am I? Yes. Cool, it doesn't really change the result too much. So let's go back to the scratch board. Do we get any output here in the console? Alright, okay, element ID, button, submit button, event listener. Okay. Click text ID value, text to text ID matches with the regular expression, and if it's not null, okay. Probably document get element by ID. We just spit out whatever we get into the result. Element by ID, results, inner height HTML, and then assign res to it, see what's coming out of it. Either null or possibly an object that will come. So no obvious errors right now, so that's pretty good. So let's try an invalid one, or nothing, that's even better. Let's see what the source code actually says. Don't spot any issues there. tell us anything, does it? So let's see. Greece. What is that doing? Yeah, I know. Just want to see if that's result, element by ID. Form is bound to submit form, which is fine. Element is submit. We have an event listener. We have a function that passes the form text ID value. Text ID is here. It's bound. Regular expression is bound to that reference. What's the issue here? Oh, hang on. What did I do wrong here? Ah, right. Okay, cool. So, I passed the regular expression as a string. It shouldn't be, so that looks better. In JavaScript, you can just specify it as a symbol directly. Cool. Right. So let's see. Let's hope that picked it up. So that's an invalid versus number. Cool. Let's try another invalid one. Well, that is obviously invalid. 12. 12. So the lazy way out, and we have a valid one here as well now. Cool. If I remove one. So yeah, cool. So now it actually does what it's supposed to do. We have some sort of feedback here. Right? So the thing I got wrong was I had string quotes around the regular expression. It shouldn't be. It should directly be the regular expression itself, and then you can just call match on the string itself. So on the instance of the text ID in this case, and match it against the regular expression, and then deal with the result. In this case, we just printed it out. Clear so far? Any questions? Too easy? Too hard? No? Cool. Right, no feedback. Okay. It's fine. Okay, we're getting it. Cool, just ensure that everyone is still on board, right? So you saw how to access elements here, there. So now let's make a copy of that one. The last thing I wanted to show, oh, we're running out of time, do we? As usual. I wanted to show you how to do validation because in HTML5 there's some new primitives that you can use because people got a bit cleverer and realized, hang on, why do we do all that stuff in JavaScript itself? Can't we do part of it at least in HTML itself? Part of validation. So it's actually relatively, well, it's a solid support now in HTML natively. So it's the key idea. So what you can do there's a new primitive called pattern. And that allows you to actually specify the regular expression directly. However, in this case, you definitely need to use string the quotes, and otherwise it won't really work. So that's quite important. I don't think we need to use the slashes there. We'll test that in a second. And there's also a new attribute that's called required, so you can actually require content as well. So it actually gives you feedback on this. Good. What else do I want to show you? Let's keep it this way. So let's just do that directly. So use JS5. See if we get any feedback. There's my mouse again. There you go. Let's see if it picked it up properly or it's still cached. Yep, it picked it up. That's good. Right, let's enter some stuff. So there, you notice already here it says please fill out this field. That's the kind of default response. Can anyone see what I'm doing here anyway? Well, roughly. So I make it bigger here. So please fill out this field as the message here, so they can basically start typing stuff in here. And it actually gives you feedback, which is not super transparent right now, but it actually says please match the requested format. So now it actually enforces us to precisely do that. So let's see, and no further complaints. But if you don't do that, it actually realizes that you have a ill-fated format. Whether or not it does something to it doesn't matter, but it allows you to do some sort of input validation immediately. So that's actually quite nice. However, obviously that's still very limited feedback. You want to see a bit more, I guess. One part of it, before we start using or reusing some of the JavaScript, is to for example, use CSS content. So that's a possible option that you could indicate the state implicitly using CSS. I just copied that one cheekily in here. And it basically checks whether the input of any text field is considered valid or invalid. And this is determined based on the existence of the pattern attribute there, right? So if we know that there's pattern matching happening, then the CSS can format it accordingly. So right now I'm just doing that simplistically. Let me just show you how that looks like. Reload this. So cool. Hoping it's not my cache. And then we notice, okay, it actually doesn't work. So it prints in red if it's invalid. And if I start typing a valid one, let's see how that goes. So we actually have it changes the font, right? So in this case, bold and so on. So you can actually see real time whether you're on the right track or not. So just right, yeah. So that check still works anyway. So because we didn't change much of the underlying, well, we didn't change anything in the underlying JavaScript as of now. Cool. So if we want to, let's get rid of all that one here. We can give the user obviously a bit more feedback dynamically. So if we, for example, get the input of the, we access the input field directly, so we can do that using document get by ID. You saw that already, so nothing new here. By ID, and we want to get the field of concern. That was the text ID in this particular case. Text ID. Hang on, I forgot the sign there. Good. So just be nice and proper. And now we actually add an event lister to the input, right? So and here the keyword for the event lister is invalid, for example. So if the input field is considered invalid, then do the following. So again, we have a little function we need to attach to that. Whatever the event would probably do. In this case, we can explicitly test the state again. So you do that by saying input. Again, that's the bound field that we bound here using the text ID. If input validity is the validity state that every element has now when the pattern element is used, pattern attribute is used. So if the input is not valid, then we they can do something, and we can actually set a message that is presented to the user. So custom validity. Please enter valid. Okay, cool. False here. So the only downside is now that when we do this validity check, we want to also reset it. So we actually need to think about resetting it, and that's usually every time the user attempts a new input, so it doesn't constantly bug the user until we actually do the evaluation. And the idea is there, targets, set custom validity, reset the string basically. That's the key idea. Did I get everything right? Hang on. Yeah, should be about there. So let's see if that goes. That should give us a bit more feedback. Hopefully I got that right now. Oops. Off null. Okay, it seems to have problems identifying the element, the input. Right. We need to have an ID here. Otherwise, it won't be able to find it because we're identifying element by ID, which I didn't have. Cool. Try it again. So that looks a bit better. All right. Let's try our invalid first number again. If we do anything, shouldn't. Don't want to hang on. Form, submit form. Did I forget anything? ID is submit. The result there, that looks about good. Yeah, okay, let's try. So we go. So that is valid. Please match requested format. Doesn't spit out any errors right now, but there are probably some. What else did I get wrong? Function reattach to the input. Get element by ID. Invalid. That's right. Set enter valid custom number. Insert custom validity. And target set custom validity. What did I do wrong? I think it's the keyword autofocus. So it brings the user back to the statement. Let's try it again. Just ensure the latest version. Anyway, I think I'm not sure if I can fix that within the next few seconds, but so that works. I don't see the obvious. Hang on, I think the type here needs to be submit right. It checks. It doesn't look just for a button. It actually needs to look for a submit button, right? So when you actually submit to a form target. Right, let's do that again. And I think that should hopefully fix it, else I will make it my homework to fix this. Right. Alright, there you go. So that was the key thing. I forgot to, so now you see actually response if things go sideways, actually presents you with a message, right? So yeah, it forwards it to itself. I didn't, right now just check the form, there's no form action associated with this. So if you actually press a form submitting, it submits to itself, which kind of doesn't really make sense because we don't process it yet. But I just wanted to show a pure JavaScript solution in itself. So all the validation is done in JavaScript itself. That's the HTML5 solution. Again, the issue here I should have made this button of type submit, not of type button itself. It's not yet another button we can check, but rather it's a submit button for that form. And if that happens, then these event listeners are actually called and evaluated and then show the corresponding message. So in this case, you can set a custom validity message, and that says basically enter a Fortzel number or simply reset it if you re-attempting new input. Cool. Questions? Any questions, thoughts? No magic, right? So everyone good? Good. I'll be here later at 4 to 6, and Petter as well. And the idea is basically it's optional to you, but I think it's a good opportunity for you to really implement a mini, for example, web service, or perhaps try the JavaScript one out yourself, and do a bit of regular expression checking on user input, right? If you want to do that and you want to have a hand with this, if you're comfortable and you know what you're doing, well, you can do it on your own. It's really an optional thing that you're more than welcome to attend if you have any questions. Yep. Any thoughts, worries right now? No? Cool. Thank you. I need the guys who are actually signing up for the evaluation group to leave me their names, and that's pretty much it for now. Thank you very much.
You got a pen?